For just the last few days, we've watched a really fragile ceasefire in the Middle East just completely shatter. We are looking at a rapid, and I mean absolutely rapid, violent escalation between the US and Iran over literally one of the most vital waterways on the entire planet. Let's break down exactly what went down, the dueling narratives we're hearing, and the hard data behind all this.
So here is our roadmap to untangling this whole chaotic crisis step by step. First, the cycle of retaliation, then the dueling American narratives, followed by the Hormuz choke point, and we'll wrap it up with the disruption in numbers.
All right, moving right into part one, the cycle of retaliation. Let's look at these 3 nights of strikes.
To really grasp the sheer speed of this crisis, we have to look at this chronological timeline. We're talking about 3 consecutive nights of incredibly rapid military escalation. So night 1 kicks off with Israel and Iran exchanging fire. That immediately rolls into night 2, which marks the start of direct confrontation between the United States and Iran. And then, by the 3rd night, things hit an absolute boiling point. The U.S. directly strikes Iranian territory, which instantly triggers retaliatory strikes from Iran. 3 nights, 3 massive leaps in regional tension. It's literally like watching a powder keg go off. And the geographic scale of these strikes, it is absolutely massive. We saw explosions rocking southern Iran, hitting key locations like Bandar Abbas, Minab, Surgat Island, Hainam Island, Pishfolk, A.K. Vaman, and Gazan province. And you know, the retaliation was pretty much instant. Iran's Revolutionary Guard turned around and hit 18 major U.S. targets spread out across Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain. The impact was actually so immediate that Kuwait had to briefly scramble and completely close its airspace. I mean, this is escalation playing out in real time.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds into the dueling American narratives. Why exactly did the U.S. strike?
Well, as the dust started to settle, U.S. Central Command, you probably know them as CENTCOM, painted a very clinical picture of the whole operation. They came out and declared the operation over for now, noting that the U.S. Navy, Air Force, and Marines surgically targeted Iranian surveillance sites, air defenses, and communication systems. Their stated official goal: pure self-defense. They say this was strictly to eliminate threats to U.S. forces and commercial shipping in the area.
Now, what's really interesting about this is where the story kind of fractures into 2 totally different realities. On one hand, you have the military narrative from CENTCOM calling this strictly a self-defense operation. But on the other hand, you have the political reality. President Donald Trump framed these attacks as vicious and violent leverage. Basically, it's a direct threat saying that if Iran doesn't come back to the negotiating table for a peace deal, more bombs are going to drop.
And this political strategy is perfectly captured by this striking quote from Pete Hegseth. Echoing the president's stance that Iran had walked away from a peace deal, he just stated it plainly, quote, "If we need to negotiate with bombs, we will negotiate with bombs. We're very good at it," end quote. So you can see this isn't just about defense anymore. It's military force being wielded openly as diplomatic leverage.
Zooming out a bit for Section 3, the Hormuz choke point. This is really the main sticking point in all of this.
To really understand the U.S. military's justification about protecting commercial shipping, we have to look closely at the Strait of Hormuz. It is this tiny yet incredibly geostrategically significant choke point. And frankly, it's the primary sticking point paralyzing both Washington and Tehran right now. Neither side seems to be able to move past it. It's essentially the catalyst for everything else happening here.
Right now, the actual status of that water is heavily disputed. After what Iran deemed an American violation of the ceasefire, Iran's stance is that the strait is completely closed. They're warning that any approaching vessels face serious consequences, basically telling ships to just anchor somewhere else, like the Sea of Oman or the Persian Gulf. But the U.S. stance? CENTCOM flat out denies this closure. They insist commercial ships are still successfully transiting through. It's a complete contradiction.
The intensity here is just palpable. Listen to this direct threat from the IRGC aerospace commander. He said, "You're making this sacred strait foremost insecure from all across Iran. We will make the region hell for you." When you put that fierce, retaliatory threat right next to those earlier American political quotes, well, you end up with this terrifying, high-stakes diplomatic and military deadlock that's currently paralyzing the whole region.
The crucial point is really found in Section 4, the disruption in numbers. Let's look at the actual data behind the crisis. Let's cut through all the fierce political rhetoric for a second and look at the hard truth, our grounding data. President Trump recently touted this secret mission, where the U.S. claims a month-long operation successfully safeguarded shipping through Iran's chokehold. Now, interestingly enough, these details heavily echo Operation Project Freedom, which was a highly public plan announced about a month prior to secure this exact same waterway.
And the metric for this claimed success? 100 million barrels. That is the massive amount of oil the U.S. says it successfully escorted past Iran's chokehold and got through the strait over the last 4 weeks. I mean, on paper, that sounds like a huge victory, right?
Well, let's actually crunch those numbers, and this brilliantly illustrates the reality on the ground. When you compare that 100 million barrels of current transit against the 600 to 650 million barrels a month that were flowing through before this war started, the picture completely flips.
The math reveals an absolutely catastrophic drop, a plunge from 650 million down to just 100 million barrels. That tells us global energy supplies are facing a massive, undeniable disruption. And to put that into perspective, that is the exact kind of disruption you and I are eventually going to feel in our wallets at the gas pump. So the reality is, regardless of the official claims, military operations and escorts have barely made a dent in actually resolving this economic blockade.
Which brings us to the ultimate dilemma, doesn't it? The evidence clearly shows that negotiating with bombs hasn't forged a path to a peace deal, and all these military operations haven't managed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. So if these unprecedented, violent measures are totally failing to break the stalemate, what comes next? It's a pretty scary thought to sit with. Thank you so